Let's get started.
When a longtime friend calls Perot for advice on two fronts, debunking a psychic and also new evidence that a past death could be a murder. However, Perot's mind begins to unravel while solving the case, and two things become clear. Someone wants the past to stay dead, and they will kill to keep it that way.
Rebecca, tell me why you chose this movie.
I pitched this movie to our Cocoon Cast team because, as some of our viewers will soon find out, our team really likes the previous two movies in the franchise that's been created. That would be the Murder on the Orient Express and the more recent Death on the Nile.
Yes, and both of those are based on Agatha Christie books.
Yes, that's correct. And it's really cool to see Perot as a character in film again.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of mystery missing in a lot of modern movies. Plus, this looked like a very neat, spooky adaptation. It's spooky light, but just spooky enough to get started for the holiday season.
Well, and it's not gory, a little bit graphic, but not too much. It really focuses on the story and the characters, and it's well cast.
That's one of the things I really like about these movies. The casting department really knows how to hone in on the characters. I know some of our viewers who've been enjoying the series Yellowstone may recognize a familiar face.
Oh, yes, that's true. And Tina Fey is in it, comedian, which is not necessarily who you'd typically expect to see in an Agatha Christie movie adaptation.
And Michelle Yeoh has a really nice turn in this film as
I
well.
like her. We are definitely seeing more of her, and of course, my guy that I like is Jude Hill from
Belfast.
Different character, clearly, but just as likable. And Kenneth Branagh has done the directing, and he's back as Perot, which I like.
It's definitely his vision of Perot, and we're just living in it.
Well, and I know you and I had talked about it. It's interesting because the original book was set in England back in the 60s, because this is set in Italy, in Venice, in the 60s.
This is actually filmed in Venice, too, so it kind of adds to the ambiance of the film, too.
Okay, so tell me I'm wrong. So we have seen how many movies that have been set in Venice recently?
Off the top of my head, I can think of 3. And that's Equalizer 3.
Equalizer 3 was in there.
And Tom Cruise's baby, Mission Impossible, Ghost Protocol.
Well, recently, we're talking in the last few months, all of a sudden everyone's in Italy, and I don't think it's, Ethan Hunt's in there, and I don't think they all go to lunch and hang out together. I think that's just ironic that everyone is in there, and it just hit me funny. I was like, wait a minute, we're all in Venice. And to be honest with you, I don't know why they switched where they filmed the movie and why they changed that versus.
I think Venice has this incredibly storied history of ghosts and paranormal phenomena.
Well, I think England does too. There's a lot of supernatural.
But it's a different style of ghost that you encounter.
Having gone to the country, you're like, well, when I was there, I saw.
Well, just studying the folklore and the traditions that are involved.
Do you think it's a better setting for the story?
I think so, too. I think it adds to kind of that confined space that the characters find themselves into. There's only so many English country houses you can lock everybody into going, I need to find out who the murderer is.
Well, and they're usually bigger and expansive, and they're not necessarily exactly. The architecture is different. I would agree with that.
There's also several key details about, I want to say the murderee, but the victim.
The murderer versus the murderee.
I think that add to the realism of choosing Venice as a story.
That's really good, though, and I wouldn't have thought of that. I was excited to see the movie because, as we said, the actors and actresses, the story, I hadn't read the book for, oh my goodness, years. But I still remember them, and I agree with you. I think this has the potential, in my mind, to be a little bit better than The Death on the Nile, and I know you really liked the Death on the Nile movie.
I know a lot of critics have said more recently, especially on social media, that they kind of feel like they unfairly praised Death on the Nile. I think Death on the Nile did deserve the praise that it got.
Wow, that's pretty sad, though, to say. I liked it, and it's like, oh, maybe I jumped the gun just a little bit. I'm like, wow, That usually isn't what people do. They don't usually go back and say, I changed my mind.
I'm holding to my opinion that I think, even though as much as I like the adaptation of Murder on the Orient Express
Correct.
in this universe, I still think Death on the Nile in some ways is the more superior film.
Wow. Would you recommend people see all three together, even though obviously Perot, correct, is the common character, but do you see those together going well? Or
I think so. I think it really takes Perot to kind of his inner self, and you get to see different aspects of that inner self.
That's true. It's not the
unfold in these
same
movies.
line, the same. I mean, there's some familiar pieces about him. You get to know his idiosyncrasies, right? His little OCD characters or characteristics, but it did feel different to me each time.
And I think it shows Perot is getting older. Perot is one of the few characters that Agatha stuck with.
That's true. Well, and I remember years ago, and I think it was before you were even a thought, the PBS series.
That's
Perot.
what most people think of when I say Perot.
That is, well, obviously other than the books, but in terms of character visually, I'm getting used to Kenneth Branagh at this point. But, initially it was like, oh, we'll kind of see how this goes. And the cinematography, pretty fabulous.
Haris Zambarakulokos.
Oh my, hope you're saying that one correct.
I really hope I am. This is kind of Braugh's all-star team. He brought back Hans for the cinematography, which I'm really happy to see.
Yes.
A lot of the visuals, even the most simple frames to me, feel very luscious in terms of color.
The
character
color
placement
was
was a big deal for me in this one. There's one sequence that any other cinematographer could have just put flat character here, but I really like the positioning of it. It really created that kind of claustrophobic environment that we were talking about.
Well, and you think about it, they're in this house, and there is a murderer and potential murderees. And I agree with the claustrophobic feel. It adds to that discomfort, that closed, confined spaces. There's nowhere to hide. There's nowhere to go.
Keep in mind, this is a PG-13 rated movie. You're not going to be able to play with the same bag of tricks as, say, a horror director with an R-rated movie is going to have.
And I appreciated, actually, that it was PG-13 because we had reviewed The Equalizer 3. A lot more graphic, a lot more
intense.
There's the theme of, seeing people getting killed that seems to follow Cocoon Cast. However, I would say I appreciated the fact that it focused more on the story versus the murdering, which sounds graphic in of itself. I guess how it's murdered and how it's portrayed does make a difference in my mind.
It also allowed for some surprises in the moments that the story focuses around.
Well, and the thing that was funny to me is, if our Cocoon Cast is caught on at this point, I love set design. I was not overly enamored with the set design on this one.
I enjoyed it. It did what it needed to do.
It did what it needed to
But
do.
there's definitely some choices that they've made, I think, that add to the realism of this.
And so let me hear this.
I like it more than you.
That's bingo. That's exactly what I was
like
going to
it more
say.
than you.
I believe that that's true, which is interesting to me. And the costuming, usually you're highlighting the costuming and I'm over there going, set design. And I didn't find myself doing that. However, the cinematography really did speak to me. I agree with everything you said. The coloring was really terrific. The music was good. It was funny because some movies, the music stands out and dwarfs the actual movie. Didn't feel that, but it wasn't overly memorable to me.
That was my key thought with it. I love Hildur Guðnadóttir's work. I was really surprised not to see Patrick Doyle on this film. Mm-hmm. Normally that's Braugh's longtime collaborator when it comes to music.
Sure.
But Hildur's also worked with Denis Villeneuve, we've
got to practice saying that 3 times fast, right?
Yeah, I got to especially practice that, especially before Dune, which is what most people know him for.
That is true.
She's previously worked with Dennis on Arrival and Prisoners.
And your movie Tar that you really enjoyed.
Oh, that was fantastic.
Yeah, we saw that
Hildur
too.
did a really good job of developing the music as an encompassing but also inviting presence in those films. Mm-hmm. And I felt like that was just kind of missing here.
I agree with that. And we did see it in Dolby Cinema, which did make a difference. I know there were sounds and some parts of the music, but mostly sounds and voices that were coming from different parts of the theater as a result of the Dolby Cinema. Did you experience that from where you were sitting as well?
Yeah, I think if the audio mix had been compressed, I think some of the effects of the choices that have been made and also the responses to the characters would have been less understandable.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I just enjoy this franchise an awful lot. And I was very excited to see this one. I'm not sure if they have a fourth one in the works, but I actually hope that they do at this point.
Well, maybe if Michael Green finishes his work on BioShock, maybe we may see another one.
That would be great. Do we have any questions from the box?
Given that this is the third installment of the Pro series by Kenneth Branagh, does it feel cohesive? Does it feel like a copycat of each episode or movie? Or do they feel different and distinct and keep your interest?
I think there's definitely a noticeable difference with this one, especially considering the reliance on spooky tropes, if you will.
That's a category, genre, spooky tropes. I would agree with that. They all felt very different to me. The thread obviously is Poirot, but as we said earlier, the different aspects of him, though it's consistent and expected, it's not overly like, oh, he's going to do da da da. But it helps that we like the character and we have some love for the character to start with, I think.
I think part of the fun is finding the things that are similar and it's like, okay, how do they twist it in this one?
That's a good point. I like that. Do we have any questions from the box?
After The Death on the Nile, which was the previous installment, arguably flopped in the theaters, do you think this installment will do better?
I think the fact that they're not rescheduling this 3 times, the fact that they haven't had to do any major reshoots with the story, and also everybody who wants to go out and see movies now will help it. I think it's definitely going to get a nice noticeable bump, and people now have time to see the other 2.
Well, and Death in the Nile was originally scheduled for 2019 and was pushed out to 2022. And arguably our world was in a very different place at that point.
Also doesn't help that you had one of the lead actors in a huge scandal at that point too.
That's true. And none of that is happening at this point. Rebecca, it is that time of the show where your flying moths are going to land. Out of 5 moths, 1 to 5, 1 to 5, 1 to 5. What do you think?
This is a 3 moth film for me.
All right, number 1 reason for a 3 moth?
I feel like Branagh is inching closely to greatness. He's not there yet, but it's a pretty solid film.
Wow, okay, inching to greatness. My moths would land slightly higher. I would say 3 and a wing. And for me, because, again, love for the characters, it's to me, it's an above average movie. Because of the cinematography, the acting, of course, right? Jude Hill, I really like him. Kenneth Branagh. And Tina Fey, I think, added a really good comedic element to it. The screenwriting, to me, was fun. There was humor in it. And so for me, I would add the extra wing for that reason. Rebecca, do you think the average Anthony, average Tina would enjoy this movie?
I think the average Anthony, if you're looking for a nice spooky night out without too many jumps and thrills and scares, this is a good way to dip your feet in and have some fun.
Well, and I think it's a good date night movie, right? Kind of it's definitely not a rom-com, but I would say, who you're sitting next to, hold their hand, squeeze it a little bit tighter, but it's not nightmare worthy.
No, but I will say I was very impressed with the visuals. I had recently seen The Nun on Monday, and I think the visuals in this film are much more beautiful and somewhat shocking. I
haven't seen The Nun, so I can't speak to the comparison aspect, but I would say just on its own, I would agree. I think it's a good movie. Think it's worth a watch?
Totally think it's worth a watch.
I think it's worth a watch. And you'd recommend it to our cinema community despite the 3 moth rating?
Yes, this is one that I will definitely be telling people in our cinema community about.
Okay, great. Thank you for watching this Cocoon Cast clip. This clip was taken from our weekly show, which is released on Saturdays.
If you enjoyed this video, click the link or head over to our main channel for more movie reviews, Hollywood news with a slice of snark. Thank you for watching, and remember,
movies are
better together.